In the quiet reaches of Ravenwell Manor, where ivy clung to stone like memories that refused to die, the halls carried whispers of a man both pitied and feared. Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Ravenwell. Once a brilliant soldier and celebrated host of London's glittering salons, he had retreated into solitude after the duel that stole his sight. Rumor said he had changed overnight, that the laughter in his voice had turned to frost, that his heart, once open to the world, had been locked away in darkness. Servants moved like ghosts through the manor, speaking in low tones, for the Duke detested noise, light, and sympathy in equal measure. Into this somber household came Lady Marianne Whitmore, a woman whose name rarely appeared on anyone's dance card. At 23, she was neither poor nor wealthy, neither strikingly beautiful nor particularly plain, simply invisible. Her late father had once served the Duke's regiment, and when the position of companion and reader opened, she was recommended by an old family friend. She accepted, though her hands trembled as the carriage climbed the long drive. The Duke was said to be merciless, his temper quick and his patience thin. She prayed she would not anger him. Her first sight of him was not at all what she expected. He stood by the fire, tall and severe, his eyes pale and unfocused, yet still commanding the room like a general on a battlefield. "You're the reader," he said, his tone clipped but not cruel. "Miss Whitmore, was it?" She curtsied, her voice barely audible as she replied, "Yes, Your Grace." His head tilted slightly at the sound of her voice, not looking, but listening. "You may sit. The letters are on the desk. Begin with the first one." That was how their strange companionship began, her voice filling the silence he had created, his face unreadable as she read letters, poetry, and dispatches aloud. Days passed in quiet rhythm, her reading, his questions, her nervousness easing into fascination. He never interrupted unnecessarily, but when he did, his inquiries were sharp and unexpected. "You sound sorrowful when you read that passage," he once said. "Why?" She blinked, startled. I didn't realize I did." "A man learns much when the eyes are taken from him," he murmured, "and sound becomes your only truth." Marianne found herself studying him as he listened, the faint crease at his brow, the way his fingers brushed against objects to orient himself, how he would sometimes pause and lift his head slightly as if chasing the ghost of a scent or the flutter of a sound no one else heard. In time, she began to speak more freely, describing the changing colors of the autumn leaves, the look of the morning mist over the moors, the curve of the silver goblets at dinner. "Tell me," he once asked quietly, "how do the stars look tonight?" She turned toward the window. "Like scattered diamonds across black velvet," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then I am richer than any man alive." But beneath the calm, Marianne carried a fear she dared not voice. She had begun to feel something for this man who could never look into her eyes. Each word she read for him, each description she painted, was a thread binding her heart to his unseen gaze. Yet she believed such affection could never be returned. He was a duke, distant, damaged, and proud, and she was a nobody, a shadow in his household. Still, sometimes, when his hand brushed hers as she turned a page, she could not help but wonder, could he see her? Not with his eyes, but with something deeper, something the darkness had sharpened instead of destroyed. And so the days of Ravenwell passed like soft candlelight in a long corridor, dim, trembling, and full of longing. Little did Marianne know, her voice had already awakened something the Duke thought buried forever. Winter descended upon Ravenwell Manor like a ghostly cloak, muffling the world in quiet snow and soft lamplight. Within those vast, echoing walls, life settled into a rhythm, one built around the steady cadence of Lady Marianne's voice and the Duke's attentive silence. What had begun as mere duty soon became something more intimate, something both terrifying and tender. Each morning, Marianne would find him in the library, seated by the tall windows, though he could not see the pale light pouring through them. His hands would rest over a book, as though remembering what it felt like to read. And when she entered, he would always say softly, "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," his tone low and sincere, as though her presence alone gave meaning to his sightless dawns. It was during one of those winter mornings, as she read from Byron's newest poems, that he interrupted her. something he rarely did. "You pause," he said quietly. "Why?" She startled slightly, her eyes lifting from the page. "Because—" she hesitated. "Because the words feel too alive. I'm afraid I'll ruin them." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "You do not ruin them. You give them breath. When you speak, I see what I once could not." His voice trembled almost imperceptibly, and she felt her heart twist. "I only read, Your Grace," she murmured. He shook his head slowly. "No, Miss Whitmore. You see for me. And you do it with more honesty than most men who still have their sight." Those words lingered long after the fire dimmed that night. Marianne sat awake in her small chamber beneath the servant's wing, staring out the frost-covered window, replaying the sound of his voice. No man had ever spoken to her with such gravity, as if her very existence meant something. Yet that very weight frightened her. For all his gentleness, the Duke was a man forged in grief and iron. What if she read too much into his kindness? What if his attention was merely gratitude born of loneliness? The thought haunted her like the cold. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened in ways neither could name. He began asking her questions that startled her, about colors, sounds, and emotions. "What does blue look like to you?" he once asked. She thought for a long moment, then said softly, "Like peace, like the sound of a violin at dusk." He turned his face toward her, and though his eyes could not see, she felt his gaze like a flame. "Then I think I prefer your sight to mine." Sometimes, when she described the world, he would close his eyes and smile faintly, murmuring, "You paint with your words, Marianne. You give life to things I thought were lost forever." The way he spoke her name, without title, without distance, sent warmth through her that no fire could match. Yet the intimacy terrified her. She was his companion, nothing more. The servants already whispered that the Duke's moods had changed, that he smiled more often, that he asked for her voice even at supper. Gossip traveled quickly in old houses. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Marianne found him standing by the grand piano in the drawing room, his fingers brushing the keys. "I used to play," he said quietly, "before the accident." She hesitated by the doorway, afraid to intrude, but he gestured toward her. "Would you read me something fitting for this storm?" She nodded and took her place near the fire, her voice steady as she began a sonnet about loss and redemption. Halfway through, he stopped her gently. "You sound as though you know what loss feels like," he said. Her breath caught. "We all do, Your Grace," she whispered. "Some of us just carry it more quietly." A pause, deep and aching, filled the room. Then he said softly, "Then you understand me more than anyone else ever has." From that night onward, there was no denying it. Something unspoken, fragile, and powerful bound them together. Yet neither dared acknowledge it aloud. He was a duke, imprisoned in his darkness, and she was the light he refused to reach for. What neither of them knew was that another presence in the manor had begun to notice their closeness, Lady Cassandra, the Duke's ambitious cousin, whose beauty was matched only by her cunning. She had long planned to be Duchess herself, and she would not stand idly by while a lowly reader stole what she believed was hers. And so, as snow blanketed the grounds and candles flickered in the frozen silence of Ravenwell, shadows began to stir, jealous, watching, waiting. What blossomed between the blind Duke and his reader was not only love, but a threat to everything society held sacred. For though the Duke could not see the faces around him, he would soon discover how clearly envy could be felt, and how painfully betrayal could be heard. The new year arrived at Ravenwell Manor under a sky heavy with gray clouds, and with it came the slow unraveling of everything Lady Marianne held dear. Her life had become a quiet rhythm of mornings by the fire and evenings spent reading until the candles burned low. Yet beneath that calm, something fragile pulsed between her and the Duke, something neither dared to name. To speak of affection between them would have been scandalous, a folly that could ruin them both. And so, she buried her feelings in the ink of her secret letters to her sister Charlotte, the only soul to whom she could confess the truth. In those letters she wrote of the Duke's voice, his rare smiles, and the way he seemed to see her in ways that frightened and thrilled her heart. But fate, as always, is cruelest when the heart begins to hope. One stormy afternoon, a servant, bribed and clever, placed one of those private letters into the hands of Lady Cassandra Whitby, the Duke's elegant and venomous cousin. Cassandra had been watching Marianne for weeks, her painted lips curving in disdain at every whispered exchange, every small smile shared between the blind Duke and his companion. Now, holding Marianne's heartfelt confession, Cassandra's pale eyes glittered with triumph. "So," she murmured, "our little reader loves her master. How poetic and how convenient." The trap was set that same evening. The Duke was in his study, his hand resting lightly on the polished oak of his desk, as Cassandra's voice purred from across the room. "My dear cousin, it pains me to speak ill of your companion, but I fear Miss Whitmore's affections may not be as innocent as you imagine." He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Speak plainly, Cassandra." With false sorrow, she unfolded the letter, the sound of the paper cruelly loud in the quiet room. "She writes of her love for you, of how she wishes to soften your heart, to awaken your loneliness. Surely you must see what this means." Adrian's jaw tightened. "May I hear it?" Cassandra read Marianne's words aloud, stripped of context, made to sound desperate and manipulative. "She admits her heart trembles when you speak her name. She dreams of you, of your hands, your voice. Tell me, cousin, is that loyalty or ambition?" The Duke's face turned to stone. He said nothing. Cassandra pressed on, her voice silken and merciless. "You've been generous but blind in more ways than one. The staff whispers that she schemes for your pity. I beg you, dismiss her before she ruins you." That night, when Marianne came to the library to read as usual, she sensed it instantly, the change in him. The air was cold, his tone clipped. "That will be all, Miss Whitmore," he said without facing her. "Your services are no longer required." Her breath caught. "Your Grace, have I done something wrong?" He rose to his full height, his face pale with restrained fury. "I will not be mocked by deceit, Miss Whitmore. Whatever game you have played, it ends now. You may collect your wages and leave by morning." His words struck like a blade. "Deceit?" she whispered. "I have done nothing." "Enough!" His voice was thunder. "Do not insult me further. I have heard your letters." Her heart stopped. "My letters?" she stammered. "To whom?" "To your sister," he said bitterly. "It seems even the blind can see when they are being made fools of." Tears welled in her eyes, her body trembling. "Those letters were private," she whispered, "and meant for no one else's ears." He turned away. "Then you should have guarded your words more carefully." When she realized he would not listen, that his trust had been poisoned beyond repair, something inside her shattered. "If you truly believe I sought to deceive you," she said softly, "then you see far less than I thought." The next morning, she was gone. Her small trunk was loaded onto a carriage before dawn, and the snow-covered fields of Ravenwell faded behind her like a dream dissolving at sunrise. For 2 days the Duke did not leave his study. The manor was silent except for the echo of his cane on the marble floors. He told himself he had done what was necessary, that he had spared himself humiliation. Yet her voice haunted him. Every room seemed emptier, every sound duller, every silence colder. At night, he reached for the bell to summon her, forgetting she was gone, and then fate intervened once more, as it always does when the truth demands to be seen. On the 3rd night, as he walked through the west corridor, he overheard voices in the drawing room, Cassandra's laughter, sweet and cruel. "Poor Adrian," she said, "so easy to fool. The great Duke undone by a girl's voice and a few sentimental words. If only he knew how easily I twisted her letter." The world stopped. Adrian froze, every nerve aflame, twisted her letter. The words cut through the fog of pride and shame like sunlight through storm clouds. In that instant, he understood, truly saw. His breath came ragged, and the cane slipped from his grasp, clattering against the floor. Cassandra's laughter faltered. "Adrian!" But the Duke said nothing. His sightless eyes lifted toward the sound of her voice, burning with fury and revelation. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the door. He knew what he had to do. For the first time in years, the Duke of Ravenwell moved with the certainty of a man who finally saw the truth. The storm outside Ravenwell had long since faded, but inside Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Ravenwell, a storm far more violent raged. Each echoing step through the manor's corridors seemed to resound with one word: fool. He had believed the venom of others over the truth of his own heart. He who prided himself on seeing without eyes had been blinded by pride. By the time the first light of dawn touched the frost on the windows, his decision was made. He ordered his horse saddled, ignoring the protests of his butler and physician. "I am going to Whitmore Cottage," he said simply, "and I will not return until I have seen her, in every way that matters." The journey was brutal. The wind bit like knives, and the road was half swallowed by snow. But Adrian rode on, guided by memory and by instinct, the same instincts that had failed him when it mattered most. Every moment replayed in his mind. Her soft laughter as she described the colors of autumn, the tremor in her voice when she read of love and loss, the warmth that lingered in the air when she entered a room. Those memories were no longer comforts. They were accusations. He had cast her out, and with her, the last light in his life. By the time he reached Whitmore Cottage, his horse was trembling, its coat glistening with frost. The small home stood at the edge of the forest, smoke curling gently from its chimney. He dismounted clumsily, nearly stumbling as his boots sank into the snow. Marianne's voice floated faintly from inside, reading aloud as she always did. His chest tightened. He followed the sound to the doorway, pausing just before he knocked. For a moment, fear paralyzed him. What if she would not forgive him? What if he had already broken something beyond repair? But then, through the door, he heard her voice, trembling, softer now, reading one of the poems she'd once shared with him. "Love is not seen with the eyes, but with the soul's quiet knowing." That was enough. He lifted his hand and knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she stood, pale from tears, eyes wide with disbelief. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Snowflakes drifted between them, melting on her lashes. "Your Grace," she whispered, as though saying his name hurt. "Why are you here?" He removed his gloves, his hands trembling. "To beg your forgiveness." The words came rough, stripped of pride. "I was blind, Marianne, not because of the duel, but because I refused to see the truth when it stood before me." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "You don't need to do this." "I do," he said, stepping closer. "You showed me the world, and I repaid you with cruelty. You gave me sight, and I chose darkness." She tried to look away, but his voice held her. "When I thought you'd deceived me, I told myself I no longer needed you, and yet every silence since has been unbearable. I hear your voice in every corner of Ravenwell. I cannot see your face, but I see you, Marianne, more clearly than I have ever seen anything in my life." Her breath shuddered. "Why tell me this now? Why come here?" "Because I cannot live another day knowing that I cast away the only light I've ever known." His voice broke. "You once described the sunrise to me. You said it was gold and pink and full of promise, but you were wrong." He reached out, finding her trembling hand and drawing it to his chest. "It feels like this. Your touch, your forgiveness, your heart beating next to mine." The tears that had gathered in her eyes finally fell. "I wanted to hate you," she whispered, "but I couldn't, even when you sent me away." He smiled faintly. "Then perhaps there's hope for me yet." She studied his face, the exhaustion, the sorrow, the sincerity. Slowly, she stepped forward and pressed his hand against her cheek. "You never needed eyes to see, Adrian. You just needed courage." He drew her into his arms, and for the first time in years, he felt whole. The snow fell softly around them, muffling the world until there was only their breath, their heartbeat, their quiet laughter breaking through the years of grief. Weeks later, the Duke returned to Ravenwell, not alone this time. At the spring ball, where gossip once whispered of his temper and his tragedy, the doors opened to reveal him walking arm in arm with Marianne Whitmore, her head held high, her smile trembling but radiant. The crowd fell silent. "May I present," he said, his voice steady, "the future Duchess of Ravenwell, the woman who taught me to see." And as the orchestra began to play, he turned to her and whispered, "Describe it to me. The light, The faces, the colors. She smiled through her tears. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but not half as beautiful as what you've become." He laughed, a sound the manor had not heard in years. And together they began to dance, his hands guided not by sight, but by faith, by love, and by the invisible light that only two souls who have truly seen each other can ever share.